So you mentioned that you grew up in New York City, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what it was like going from the city to about as country as it gets in the summers at Crystal Lake.
Yes, well, my going to Crystal Lake was a total surprise to me. My parents uh, woke me up early one morning and we headed to LaGuardia Airport, and it was my first plane ride. And we flew Allegheny Airlines to Williamsport, and I think it flapped its wings. It was quite a long time ago. And then I realized they were sending me to camp for 8 weeks, and I was 8 years old. But they both worked and they wanted me to have a happy summer. That winter before camp, Joe Alford came to New York City, and I'm sure he did this in Baltimore and Philadelphia and other cities, and met in a restaurant in New York City called Susan Prince Restaurant, where he talked about camp, showed pictures, maybe slides possibly, or movies. And we sang camp songs, and we had a little lunch after church with other young people. And I think that's what kind of gave my parents the idea. And it was a shock because I grew up on cement playgrounds and roller skated on cement playgrounds. We had swings and slides in a nearby park. But that was the extent of my outdoor exposure. So arriving on a mountaintop in Pennsylvania was a huge change for a city kid. And even just being with lots of other children as well as counselors, because I was an only child. I remember a lot of things were scary for me, like swimming in a lake, which I couldn't see who was down there. I remember there was Little Olympics, and I had never picked up a bat in my life, and they wanted me to play softball, and I didn't know how to play softball. So some things were very, very new to me, but the horseback riding was a great love, and that was my favorite thing, I think, of all. But I did learn to swim a little bit, learned about the mythology of the stars that the Native Americans were interested in and shared and so forth. But Joe had a huge love of that. Dottie was very busy, very stern, perhaps you might say, at that time. I think because there was a huge responsibility now on the two of them to be running the camp. She would ride her bicycle all over camp, and we thought that was great and funny. And she had a beautiful singing voice, so we always enjoyed hearing her sing. And she was definitely in charge, and we were sort of in awe of her and perhaps a little afraid of her, to be honest.
It's so fun to hear what sounds both similar and different. Like we still do Little Olympics today, and what you're describing with the Alfreds sounds really similar to what Becca does today with the camp shows. It's fun to hear that those have been going on for a while.
Yes.
So you mentioned the Alfords, and because we are doing this video in the spirit of the 1960s at camp, could you talk a little bit for some of us who didn't know them, like what they were like and what the atmosphere they created at camp was like?
Sure. Well, I went to camp for 2 years, and then I went 5 years to another Christian Science camp in Virginia, which focused on horseback riding. And then I came back for 3 more years as a camper, and then CIT and counselor. And that's when I got to know Joe and Dottie better, although they were so busy running camp. But I remember Joe and his bugle, and his love of Indian lore, and the council fires that he was chief over, and how much I learned from those experiences. I know that it's changed these days, but learned about the mythology of the stars that the Native Americans were interested in and shared and so forth. But Joe had a huge love of that. Dottie was very busy, very stern, perhaps you might say at that time. I think because there was a huge responsibility now on the two of them to be running the camp. She would ride her bicycle all over camp, and we thought that was great and funny. And she had a beautiful singing voice, so we always enjoyed hearing her sing. And she was definitely in charge, and we were sort of in awe of her and perhaps a little afraid of her, to be honest. In later years, up until her passing, we were just really close. And Anna and Dottie came to our house here and stayed overnight, and we'd had a lot of fun up in Rochester. So we have some happy memories.
Could you talk a little bit about if going to camp in the summers affected your path in Christian Science, and if it did, how?
Oh, I think it did, definitely. I did attend a very big church and Sunday school in New York City growing up, and my parents were very dedicated. We lived an hour away in Manhattan from the church we went to, but every Sunday we were there. But camp reinforced a lot of what I was getting in a more social, relaxed atmosphere. But we marked our books every week and had Sunday school and Vespers. And that just created a wonderful, nurturing environment. And in a situation where you could really practice it in daily life and had opportunities to put it to the test, so to speak. And so I loved all the aspects of Christian Science and meeting other Christian Science youth and making good friends, many of whom I'm still in touch with. So that's been very special.
I know that's one of my favorite parts of camp. Do you have a favorite cabin at camp? And if so, why?
Oh, I have a story. Yes, Whiaapi was the cabin I was in probably the last 2 or 3 years of my camping experience and counseling experience there. And I loved it because it was near the lake, and they were good friends. And the funny story, I think, is in 1989, my husband and I at the time took our 2 kids, 2 girls, I think they were 5 and 8, to family camp, one of the first family camps. And I asked Joe if we could be in Whiaapi, and he said, sure. So I was excited, and we went to Whiaapi, and I didn't know that it hadn't been used in a while. And we made ourselves at home, and ended up having mice jumping all over us at night. And it was, it's funny now, but at the time it was kind of, what? And he brought in peanut butter and captured a few mice, but I ended up moving into the lodge. So I was really kind of like not interested in the wildlife sleeping with me at night in Whiaapi, but it was fun at the time.
That was actually the first cabin that I stayed in when I was a kid. Yeah, as a camper.
Oh my goodness.
And the last one that I stayed at when I was there. So
Wow,
yes,
okay.
it's a good one. You mentioned being a CIT, and that program's near and dear to my heart. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what that experience was like for you.
Oh, that was an amazing program. There was a gentleman named Andy Sim, and he was very active. Maybe, I don't know if he was the director of the boys camp, but he was an educator, teacher, maybe superintendent in a New Jersey school. And he had a program for the CITs that we engaged in all fall and winter until we went back to camp. And I remember learning about time management and having to fill out what I did every 15 minutes for a week. It was like a course in the off season. And we were just so excited to get through it and then actually be a CIT once we got to camp. But
so I read and I heard about the Lonely Eagle edition that you ran while you were a counselor. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that.
I'm still looking for a copy. I'm sure I have it somewhere. I'm starting to dig in my archives now. Yes, one of the classes I taught as a counselor was poetry or creative writing. That was the official title, creative writing. And I love taking the campers who are interested down one of the lake paths, and we'd all find a little spot and just sit or lie down and look at the sky or the pine trees and think about what was inspiring us. And the campers came up with some wonderful poems and haiku and stories, but mostly shorter things. And then the idea came to let's have one for each of the 4-week sessions, because at that time, for many years, camp was 4 weeks and 4 weeks with a visiting day in between for parents. I typed it all up we had in those days something called a mimeograph machine, and it was these purple and white sheets that you typed on, and then you put them through some drum and they came out with purple ink. I don't know what it was, but anyway, Scott here were you a work boy or something? Anyway, he and I were good friends in the last year or two of camp. And we had met at winter camp, actually, the week between Christmas and New Year's. And he offered to help me run it all off. So we had a lot of Lonely Eagle editions to give to the campers to take home. And it was a nice compilation of their wonderfully creative work. And I really hope I find that sometime so I can share it.
Me too. It sounds wonderful. For someone who didn't go to the camp in the 60s, I'm very intrigued by the concept of Crystal Chief and Crystal Princess.
Mm.
Could you tell me a little bit about what that competition was like and what it was like for you being Crystal Princess?
Yes. I believe it was the older girls and older boys were given the opportunity by clan to compete doing a number of skills, making a fire with 2 matches, tying knots, learning Mrs. Eddy's page 210 of miscellany, what our leader says by heart. It was a whole smorgasbord of requirements. And I remember I had to learn it and say it to Dottie. She was the judge of how well that was memorized. I was a wolf. I am a wolf. Yay, go wolves. And
Me too.
And oh, really? Oh, so wonderful.
You're both dropped in your baby.
And then and I'm not sure how the selection was made, but apparently we were given points or something, and I became Crystal Princess, and Scott here became Crystal Chief. And I think we just led the procession to the campfire. I think that was pretty much the extent of our power.
And you've mentioned your husband Scott, who's sitting next to you. It sounds like. Do you have any special memories with him at camp, or about meeting him at camp?
Yeah. So I guess it would have been December of, I'm not sure which year, but it was as I mentioned before, the week between Christmas and New Year's. It was a whole week that you could go to camp and skate on the lake. Dottie would lead the skiing, tobogganing down, what was that called? Eaglesmere, I think, a nearby resort, which had a very big toboggan, and it would go shooting down a steep hill onto their lake. And this was done, of course, at night, so you couldn't see anything. But that's where we first met. And we were both from New York, so we thought that was kind of neat. And we just had a lot in common. And even though we lived 6 hours away, we would write letters to each other and talk about camp. And then the next summer, I think he was a work boy and I was a CIT or counselor by then, I think. And then we stayed in touch and saw each other a few times. I would visit his mom in Corning, New York, and we even started Principia together. But he had some other adventures that didn't include Principia, so we went separate ways. And then 35 years later, we crossed paths again, and here we are. We're married 20 years this year, so it's amazing what a friendship from camp, you know. But he was always a lot of fun and more adventurous than I was, so it was kind of a contrast. And and
Opposites attract.
yeah, something like that.
That sounds very special.
Yeah, it is.
Well, are there any other memories or experiences from camp that you'd like to share? I'd love to hear anything else that you'd like to add.
Oh, thank you. Well, I've certainly enjoyed Fall for All, formerly, what was it? Fall Weekend, or that kind of a thing, Alumni Weekend. It's just been great to keep in touch, and living a lot closer to camp, 3 hours or so, has been fun. It's a beautiful drive from Rochester to camp, and seeing friends from way back then is so much fun. We're just so grateful. I'm so grateful for the camp experience, and means a lot. Do you want to speak to my sidekick here?
Sure, Scott, if you have anything to add, we'd love to hear your
Sure.
stories too.
One of the other things that I distinctly remember that I loved so much was the music. And Saul Cohen was just phenomenal. I stayed in touch with him for years afterwards. I remember coming as a camper, my first year. I think I was around 12. And I was in Genesee. And I still remember the counselors, had come back from Nam. They'd been in the service. And some of them were just so tough. We had to do these exercises. And boom, 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 boom. It was very much eye-opening. And always raising the flag every morning, and bringing it down at night, and, the trumpet there. The structure, I think, taught everybody a lot. And then you had certainly the interaction with so many people. That was very, very, very interesting, uplifting, interesting. Going out hiking and camping was very, very special. The funny story I've told, and I've told it before, is we had a survival hike. And the one guy leading it was just, he'd been over in Nam, and he was just real tough. And was showing us lots of greens to eat. We were looking for anything we can eat or catch. And I was just up the road from Crystal Lake, not too far up, Camp Road, and over back in a little bit. And I ran across, let me see you keep a straight face, a skunk. And what ended up transpiring is, I had heard if you keep their tails down, they can't spray. But I hit it with a branch, and invariably I got sprayed. but still,
Oh, no.
but still got it. And well, first off, I snuck back in and used the shower across from Norman Lodge because I was, and we weren't supposed to be back in camp. But then we ended up eating eating the skunk.
You ate the skunk.
Yeah. Well, it was meat. It was after a couple of after a couple of days of trying to come up with enough food to eat. It was the positives to me, I think, in retrospect, were the many different people that you got to be friends with. So many different personalities. You learn so much from so many different ones. And, that's campers, that's counselors, right across the board. Dottie. I stayed close friends with Dottie. She was the tough one. We were only allowed to go over to the girls' camp like once a week, maybe, or something like that. And I can remember sneaking over, and Dottie'd go up and down the road with a flashlight, trying to make sure keep things straight. And I can remember hiding behind the bushes as she went by. Working with Johnny Quattlebaum in the kitchen, which is really neat. Really special. I mean, was it easy? It was hard work because I did a lot. I washed all the pots and pans and everything. But learned so much, and I've never had. I still want more of his fried chicken. And then I worked in the stables, which was real. Jean McKean was such a neat lady. But I had to do lots of shoveling. It was neat that building got built because the longhouse was tough. You couldn't. You had to have two different meals, the girls in one and then the boys in another. You're thinking about when they built Alfred Hall. I remember the one thing they had, and I wish I remembered what you called it. But they had a little house building next to it that was had a fire pit in it. And you could burn anything in it. So they would burn scraps, they would burn wood, they'd burn anything. And then they had hot water lines that ran underneath the ground over into Alfred Hall, and they could heat with it. And it was just did a phenomenal job. Yeah, she was just saying how they would. I don't think they did it with the guys.
Well, they did it for us.
They'd play Broadway musicals like My Fair Lady and that stuff when the girls were eating.